I'm glad you're on this case with me, Anderson. It's right up your alley.
What makes a really great detective mystery, in my opinion, is when you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the detective and kind of pay close attention to things, look at the connections, put it all together. What makes really great horror is when you wish you could look away, but you can't, like it's that balance of I don't want to look, but I need to. So detective and horror, I think, are a great mix because you kind of wish you could look away, but you really need to pay attention.
Hello?
Alan Wake?
Yes.
Do you know who I am?
No?
Remedy has long been a studio that wears its influences on its sleeve, from the hard-boiled police files of Max Payne to the new weird foundations of Control. Movies, TV shows and books have long served as inspiration. This is no different in Alan Wake 2, which blends horror and detective fiction in creatively unsettling ways. We talked to Remedy to find out why these genres work so well together, discuss some of the game's cultural touchstones, and how they bleed their way into the survival horror story, characters, and gameplay.
There is this aspect of horror as a genre having a lot to do with detective fiction, because usually the premise is something strange is happening, which is very close to a crime has happened. And on one part we are afraid to find out, but we are driven to find out.
The genres of detective fiction and horror have long been bound together within book spines and film reels. Like twins separated at birth, they are rooted in the same emotional DNA. Suspense and fear of the unknown.
The game starts out very grounded and we're kind of this investigator investigating these things. It sets the tone of like, okay, this isn't quite right. And then we can basically use that to then start layering on top this actual more supernatural horror.
Much like the genres it draws inspiration from, Alan Wake 2 is a game split into two halves. Saga and Alan are two sides of the same coin, each trying to work their way out of the nightmarish surroundings they find themselves in. Saga is heads, using her FBI-trained brain to sniff out clues to solve a series of ritualistic killings. Alan is tails, a rat caught in a hellish, surrealistic maze of his own making. Two such distinct styles demanded two different approaches to tone, however. For the former, there was plenty of source material to riff on.
One of the first things that came to us when we were thinking about creating a concept of an FBI agent coming with a partner to investigate these murders was season 1 of True Detective. The kind of dynamics between the two detectives there and kind of how they work together to kind of solve that case was something that's very compelling to us.
You're a bad man. World needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
Moving into the overlap as Saga, when you're pushing through the forest on that first overlap with the intense reds and the blending of the worlds, that felt like a deleted scene out of True Detective Season 1 to me. That blending of realities and that kind of surreal fantasy. I can praise it because I'm not on the art team. It just felt really beautiful and cool.
Silence of the Lambs is another example for sure. Twin Peaks as well, we are still drawing from that idea and from Lynch's works overall.
Twin Peaks and David Lynch works is still important for us. But then also, just from an art direction perspective, we looked at a lot of Coen brothers works, like Fargo and trying to give that slightly, we didn't want it to feel very modern. It needed to feel like it was a place lost in time.
There's one influence that towers over all, however. David Fincher's disturbing 1995 thriller, Seven.
Man. God damn.
This picture was dated 3 days ago.
When I look at Saga, I see a lot of Seven. She is a professional, consummate professional. She's very talented at what she does. She's here with her partner, Alex Casey, trying to solve this increasingly impossible seeming series of mysteries. With this kind of, it's not that they're being funny, but there's a pleasant back and forth that really reminds me of Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt.
Seven is definitely a good example of merging of detective fiction with horror. It like serial killers often come really close to a horror film while being very much a detective story as well.
Seven is perhaps where these worlds collide most prominently in film. In Alan Wake 2, this overlap can be found in a place literally called The Overlap. Areas where Bright Falls reality merges with nightmare New York. For Alan's Big Apple, there needed to be a whole new dossier of reference material, albeit again with some overlap.
We wanted it to feel more grimy, more run down. It rains a lot. So things like 7, you know, like the kind of like how they utilize rain to kind of like heighten different moods. We utilize weather to kind of not just as like a visual thing. We also want to use it actually narratively to kind of like, as things escalate, there's more water, there's more rain.
We are drawing from many various things. In The Dark Place, it goes back to visuals of what does this kind of pop culture, crime-ridden New York feel like, and we go all the way to Taxi Driver for the visuals of wet asphalt and neon signs being reflected there.
Someday a real rain will come and wash all the scum off the streets.
Scorsese's masterpiece brings the most sordid layers of 1970s New York bubbling to the surface. But Alan Wake 2's New York is far from one rooted in reality, and one that plays on the horror and uncertainty of the unknown.
We weren't really going for anything like body horror or zombie horror. We were very much leaning on what we established in the first game, which was slightly supernatural psychological horror, more focused on, for us, the building of atmosphere, the sense of dread that kind of comes from not just the world that you're in and kind of like what we do on an audioscape level and an atmospherics level to make you feel that, but also on a narrative level.
The dark place had reacted to my story. The way into the tunnels was no longer blocked.
The dreamlike nature of The Dark Place, Inception plays a role. Him struggling to understand and remember, I feel Memento is a great, once again, a detective story, kind of trying to understand and trying to piece together what has happened.
Sense of deja vu washed over me. Had I had this conversation before?
Him being the narrator and kind of not a reliable narrator from the perspective that he doesn't have the full picture. Even Fight Club, I think, is this kind of a pretty anxious, horror-esque urban story and a psychological thriller.
It's not just film and TV that Remedy looks to for inspiration either, but of course video games. The Resident Evil and Silent Hill influences are clear to see, but there are some interesting teases displayed elsewhere.
I'm really inspired by Daniel Mullins and some of the work that he's done with like Inscription and Pony Island, and I think that without giving too much away, there's a later scene with the case board that like has moments of that. I feel like his influence maybe was seen there.
Alan Wake 2 then is set to be a game that surprises. Not only is it radically different from its predecessor, but also appears to be lulling the player into a full sense of security. You may think you know the cliches and twists that come with detective fiction, you may think you're well versed in the rhythm of scares associated with survival horror, but you've never experienced a story in either of these genres written by Remedy before. For more on Alan Wake 2, check out these 11 minutes of new gameplay and our exclusive hands-on preview.